Hello, BookTube. I know it's only Thursday, but if Jonny Keen can do a Thursday Reads video, then so can I. And he did, so I'm going to. I want to take you through a few books that I'm reading today and that I read this morning or that I read late last night, starting with, trigger warning, a slim volume of poetry. Now, I always forget, at least 3 of you over the years have sung the praises of this poet. Despite the fact that my feelings on slim volumes of poetry are well known, you have still stuck up for this poet. I'm kicking myself. I don't remember right now who those 3 people were, at least 3 people. But this is A Sleepwalk on the Severn by Alice Oswald, who is the author of 7 books of poetry and has been awarded the Eric Gregory Award, the Forward Prize, the Ted Hughes Award, the T.S. Eliot Prize, and the Griffin Prize. She lives in Devon, England, and it sounds like she's won every major poetry award there is to win that means anything to poets. And this is a reflective, book-length poem in several registers, using dramatic dialogue, ghostly, meditative, and characterized by Alice Oswald's signature sensitivity to nature. The poem chronicles a night on the Severn estuary as the moonrise travels through its 5 stages: new moon, half moon, full moon, no moon, and moon reborn. And I'm just I haven't read this yet. This will be something that I will do today. It's tiny, of course. I have been on the Severn estuary many, many times. I know it. I know what it's like to tramp all over it. So well, we shall see. We shall see. I got a volume of this poet's work last year, I think, and dutifully read it because I know that she has fans among people I respect, even if I can't at the moment remember their names. And I confess, although it wasn't egregious, the way so many volumes of modern poetry that I get are, where it's just 4 semicolons printed on a page, and then I'll take a bow and answer any questions that you might have. It wasn't egregious like that, but it still seemed opaque to me, just impenetrable. And I don't know, it sounds and it looks from flipping through this thing like it's set up a little more dramatically structured, almost like a play cycle in poetry form, which could mean that it ends up being more structured, and that might be what I need. I will give it a try, and I will report back. And then the next one is also a first-time read. I haven't read this. Some of these are rereads, but this is something that I'm ashamed to say I missed completely. This is Tweak by Nick Sheff with the movie cover. This is one of the 2 books on which is based the new movie Beautiful Boy, and I've read Beautiful Boy. They're both the story of a young man who falls into drug addiction. One by the young man himself, that's this one, and one by his father. Beautiful Boy is written by his father, and I read Beautiful Boy and loved it, but I haven't read this, so I will. I just got the movie cover paperback. The movie stars Timothy Chalamet and Steve Carell as the father-son duo. I've watched it twice now, and it can be very effective. It has very effective moments. None of those very effective moments belong to Timothy Chalamet, even though all of Hollywood, that he's the only thing anyone can talk about in Hollywood, that he is, this movie has put him on the map, that he is now the next DiCaprio, that he is this electric force of nature when it comes to acting. I saw nothing of that, but I do tend to agree with the Hollywood gossip that says he's the next DiCaprio, because DiCaprio made his career on incredibly hamming overacting. And finally, at the pinnacle of that career, won an Oscar for incredibly hammy overacting that involved almost no words. And boy, oh boy, I don't know if it's intentional or just these things happen in inevitable cycles, but Timothy Chalamet is the exact same kind of actor, where just don't trust your audience at all. Over-emote at every second of every scene. And if your co-stars don't like it, the hell with them. You're the one who's pretty. And having seen the movie, in case you go to see it, I thought I should underscore something just as my public service announcement of the day. Something that the movie glides right over, clearly doesn't want you to pay attention to, and I would argue, in fact, I'd be willing to bet you my last Boston cream pie that I'm right, that the movie was extensively paid in cash to help you glide over the fact. And that is that tobacco addiction is far worse of an addiction, a drug addiction, than anything that Timothy Chalamet's character goes through in this book or that any other drug addict would go through. It is far, far worse, a drug addiction, than any of the stuff that this kid tries. And in the movie, that fact is glossed over almost completely, because it's just assumed that, you know, on the rocky road to recovery, as he's learning the hard edge of life and getting a grip on his own addiction to these horrible, monstrous drugs that make all the headlines, it's just assumed that he will smoke. I mean, come on. I'm a bitter, calloused, real-world, you know, no rosy glasses adult. I know how things are, so of course I will. And all of that is carefully crafted. There's nothing accidental about that at all. It is carefully crafted. In every situation where you see such a thing, it is carefully crafted. But you only have to look at the clinical numbers, even if you don't look at the people around you in your life. But even if you only have to look at the clinical numbers to know there is no drug worse. There is no drug that even approaches the severity, the corrosiveness, the stench, the physical side effects of industrial weapons-grade tobacco. And you might ask, well, that doesn't make any sense. Surely the worst drug in the world would be the most policed, not the least policed. It wouldn't be available over the counter everywhere in the world. But I ask you, ask yourself, knowing how the world works, knowing how politics works, and knowing how money works, isn't it more likely that the worst drug would be the one you could find anywhere? One way or another. I thought I would issue that very boring at this point PSA. For those of you who are going to see the movie is worth seeing. It has some wonderful performances, and it has an effect. I think that its dramatic effect is significantly weakened by the fact that it is so obviously a star vehicle, and star vehicles depend entirely on their star. But some of you may like this kid's scenery chewing, screaming, and over-emoting. I didn't myself. I have spent a lot of time with drug addicts, and they're not served well by this kind of kabuki theater histrionics. But maybe it will resonate with you. But one way or another, to get back to my own patch of expertise, I have not read this book, and I've read an enormous number of drug addiction memoirs. I admit, in their third act, I am always frustrated by that same illusion, that same just the 3-card Monty, where the character is up to 3 packs a day while talking about how they're making progress against their drug addiction. I just want to, every time that happens, I just want to stop the book and grab the author and say, no, that's not how drug addiction is. That you're not thinking clearly, and you're intended not to be thinking clearly. So I'm sure I will encounter that frustration in this book. But I have also read in drug addiction memoirs some stunning writing, sometimes very frustrating writing, when the author decides to lie to me in obviously provable, demonstrable ways. If the author writes a drug memoir or two, or becomes really famous for them, and is lying throughout those memoirs, then of course, whether it's billed as a memoir, it's billed as a novel, I am still going to get my hackles up. But I'll have to hope this author doesn't do that. His father certainly doesn't in Beautiful Boy. So I have high hopes. The next one is technically a reread. But it's been a very long time, and many different times. This is a collection volume called Time and Time Again. This is a collection of the science fiction time travel stories of Robert Silverberg, who's one of the great living masters of the genre. This volume, it's ugly, of course. It's got some sort of worm on the cover, and it's by 3 Rooms Press. And it doesn't strike me that it will take a solid reading. It doesn't seem like... I guess my underlying point here is that I don't understand why Robert Silverberg doesn't have a volume like this coming out from Knopf or Tor or anything like that. My horrible suspicion would be that he has burnt bridges, and that's why. But I would think bridges wouldn't matter. If you're living in 2018 and Robert Silverberg is still alive, and you are the foremost or the second or the third great publisher of science fiction in English, I would think you would go to him with a volume like this and say, "May we please, sir." I just think that's the way it should work. But one way or another, this has, I think, 24 time travel short stories. This is only a tiny sliver of what Robert Silverberg has written. But I wasn't aware when I looked at this, when I got this volume, I wasn't aware that, I guess I'd just forgotten that he'd written so much on time travel, which I think is a fairly boring little hobby horse of science fiction. It's not my favorite kind of science fiction, no offense to H.G. Wells, but still, this is going to be a delight. If I remember correctly from my glance at the table of contents, there are no stories in here that I haven't already read. But there'll be some, I could be wrong about that, first of all, there'll be some that I haven't read in 40 years. So this is science fiction on my reading list. I don't get much, I don't hold up much science fiction in the new part of this channel. I just don't seem to be in the groove for getting it or for seeing it or even for knowing what's coming. It's a terrible shame. I'm an inch away from phasing out my science fiction and fantasy top 10 list for my year-end roundup. I read a lot of it anyway. I go out of my way to get it. But even so, I'll have to work on that in 2019. But the next two here are rereads, and I already know that I love them, so it'll be a question, the rereads will be a question of just savoring or digging in, finding new stuff to love. The first one is by Maya Jasanoff. We've seen it on this channel before, I believe, last year. This is The Dawn Watch, her biography / literary memoir of Joseph Conrad. That is just magnificent. It's just a fantastic, fantastic book. And it's now out in a Penguin paperback, and that's a perfect opportunity for me to read it again. Absolutely. I know that the book was really effective, really powerful, because it came an inch away from making me want to reread Joseph Conrad. I don't think that anything, including Maya Jasanoff showing up in my living room with a sack of money, would get me to actually reread Joseph Conrad, although you never know. I've said that about other authors and been wrong. But it didn't actually get me to do that, but boy, did I love the book. It easily supersedes any other life of Conrad in English. So, and it's also, mainly the main reason for that is because it's so wonderfully written. So I highly recommend it, especially now that it's in paperback. The next one's a paperback as well, a reprint of Amy Bloom's White Houses. This is a novel about the long-standing relationship between the First Lady of the United States, Eleanor Roosevelt, and her friend, Lorena Hick, who actually moved into the White House, and who is they had a long and very intimate friendship. And I have been on and off with Amy Bloom for a long time. I thought this was fantastic. I know that probably that has nothing to do with her. She's probably been writing fantastic prose all along, but this is a historical novel that's squarely in my strike zone. So, but one way or another, whatever the reason was, I absolutely loved it. And I think I mentioned on this channel that one of the surprising things about it was the effective job it does in capturing Franklin Roosevelt, who isn't one of the two main characters, who isn't allegedly the focus of the book, but Bloom has a feel for him. And that's hard to do. He's had plenty of multi-volume biographers who, even at the end of 2,500 words, never got a feel for the guy. There was a bit of a chameleon and a lifelong inveterate liar. And that's tricky to grapple with. And of course, the dramatic heft of one half of this book is that was also tricky to marry. But boy, oh boy, if you haven't read this, you're going to love it. If you love historical fiction, you're going to love it. I was very happy to see it in a nice thin Penguin paperback. And then we have two to finish up here for my Thursday reads, which I'm only doing because Jonny Keen is able to do it. And the BookTube's old coots have to stick together. But the next two are new to me. They're hardcovers, they're new releases, and I'm going to read them they're thin. None of this, all of these, I'll show you when we do the Steve Pyramid. These are all very thin books. This does not represent a large amount of my time. But this first one is, okay, who wrote this? Jason Fried and David Heinemeier Hansen. And this is, It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work. And you see what's crossed out on the cover there. 80-hour weeks, packed schedules, taking your work home, all that sort of stuff is crossed out here. I've heard a couple of good things about this book. Of course, it's probably going to end up being just another workplace motivation book. I read 1 million of those, and they're fairly bland reading. But maybe I will be surprised. Maybe this is entirely about the crippling dysfunctions that are now the norm in American workplaces. It's absolutely insane not being in one of those workplaces anymore, but knowing plenty of people who are. The stories that I hear just horrify me, of people whose bosses tell them they get there at 7 instead of 9, You get there at 9, there'll be a subtle commentary made about how, you don't seem to be really pulling for the team. You get there at 7. In Manhattan, for instance, you get to the office at 7. You work until 7. That's just a given. It's not that you get there at 7 and you leave at 3. You get there at 7 and you work until 7, and no one thinks otherwise. No one thinks anything about it. You sneak a furtive lunch at your desk, and it's routine, according to probably a dozen people I know who work in office jobs. It's routine, while you're eating your lunch at your desk, for your boss to stop by and just continue a work conversation. And if I asked one of these people, one of these friends of mine, I said, well, okay, it's bad enough that you're not eating out at a cafe somewhere. It's bad enough that you're working at your desk. But when your boss does that, what about saying, I'd love to talk to you about this, but as you can see, I'm on my lunch break. As soon as I'm finished, I'll find you and we'll have this discussion. And every single person that I have brought that subject up, that suggestion seems completely reasonable to me. And every person I brought it up to has blanched with horror and said, that would get me fired. But it's not only all of that you get there at 7, you have your lunch at your desk, you're available at all times to talk business with your boss, who does take an hour and a half lunch every day out of the building. And that you leave at 7. It's not even all of that. It's that every one of these people that I've talked to has said that the standard line they get when they're new at their job, leaving at 7 from a 12-hour day, is be sure to be near your phone. In other words, in these jobs, and I'm sure that they are the rule and not the exception, and especially in American business and finance worlds. In other words, you are never not at work. A couple of the people that I talked to, friends of mine that work, admittedly, one of them works on Wall Street, which is admittedly a dystopian nightmare, but one of them just works in business in Rochester. And both of them have said that, both of them have been told by their employers to keep their phone with them when they take their vacation. So work literally never ends. You are the personal property of your boss. And if you don't cheerfully say yes, if you draw the line anywhere, then you don't get your bonus, you don't get promoted, or you get given crap work until you quit. Maybe this book will be entirely about that and ways to counteract it. I would certainly hope so, because it needs to be counteracted. but one way or another, we'll see. It's a thin book, so I'll blast right through it. And this next one is really thin too, but I have already dipped into it, and I am impressed. I believe this is a debut work. This is by R.J. Young, and it's called Let It Bang. Young black man's reluctant odyssey into guns. This is R.J. Young's a young black man who grows up in Oklahoma and marries a white woman, and wants to make peace with her father, his father-in-law. But her father is a gun enthusiast, to put it mildly, a gun enthusiast. And the only way that Young can think of not to be a bone of contention in the family, to make nice with this guy, is to, at first, he thinks tentatively and at arm's length, explore the world of guns in America. And then dive in deeper. Eventually, gradually dive in deeper. Like I would imagine most young black men in America, what R.J. Young knows about guns, he's mostly learned from the horrific news stories of black men being shot by policemen, but also the endless gun talk in hip-hop that he's listened to. He quotes from lyrics all through the part of the book that I read. The gun talk, of course, in hip-hop is endless. It saturates the genre. But he's never actually done anything with guns himself, and eventually, according to the published material in the course of the book, he becomes a pistol range instructor, an NRA registered pistol range instructor. But the thing that struck me in the chunk that I read was the immediacy and the beauty of the prose. Boy, oh boy. I have a feeling this is going to be a terrific read. And hard to classify. I want to read you a bit of that prose, because I think I'm going to end up recommending this book. This is the author's first Christmas morning with his new family. My eyes kept drifting back to the weapon of war on the floor next to my father-in-law, Charles. For Christmas, he had bought himself a Smith & Wesson AR-15 derivative. I didn't ask how he could just walk into Atwood's, the local fire and ranch supplies chain store, buy the thing off the shelf like a loaf of bread, and own it without fear. I kept that to myself. But just being in the same room with it felt crazy. This was Christmas. It was the day of good cheer, bad music, and ugly sweaters, of whimsy and family and fun. But I had none of those things until Charles finally took this rifle, which had been banned by law throughout most of my life, back to his bedroom. I kept that to myself, too. Pause for the ironic siren here. There we go. But that Christmas, I wondered how my country had gotten so over-the-top demanding about the right to bear arms. The biggest, baddest arms we could get our hands on. Why do so many adults I know, not just in Coweta, but across Oklahoma and the entire country, think they need a gun? Our nation hasn't fought a war on its own soil since December 7th, 1941, and before that, 1861, when the country picked a fight with itself. So what war were the people, white people, preparing for? I think that's just amazing. This is a terrific story, and I'm sure that while this story was unfolding in the author's real life, I'm sure that prose is by a natural writer. This person has always probably been a natural writer and a natural storyteller, and I'm sure that while this story was happening, in the back of his mind, he was thinking, this would make an interesting book. I'm glad that he wrote this book instead of doing what most people who experience something like that do, which is to file it away and not write it. I can't wait to finish it. This is high on the list for today. But I even on the part that I've read so far, I can recommend it certainly for your inquiry, and I will circle back to let you know whether or not the whole book played out that well. Although typically, especially in non-historical, non-biographical nonfiction like this, I can usually tell in the first 30 pages if the author's got their game on, and I think this author was probably born with his. So one way or another, Let It Bang is on my list for books to read. So we'll do a little Steve Pyramid here, and you'll see how thin all these are. This will not take me long. This is Let It Bang, a black man's experience with the white world of guns in America. So not black crime, but exactly the scenario like you described: people who wed their guns, people who carry their guns open carry to Wendy's, the whole 9 yards. That world, which for my mind is far more frightening than the gun crime world of inner city Chicago or something like that. But one way or another, I'll let you know. We have Let It Bang by R.J. Young. We have It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work, and we'll see what this book chooses to concentrate on. If it concentrates on the craziness in American workplace, that will be great. If it mentions the craziness in American workplace at the beginning and then concentrates on some sort of, Zig Ziglar solution, that would probably be less great. Then we have White Houses by Amy Bloom in a paperback, so I'll be rereading that. We have The Dawn Watch by Maya Jasnoff about Joseph Conrad. That'll be a reread. We have Time and Time Again by the great Robert Silverberg, one of the greatest science fiction practitioners of all time, living or dead. A new collection of his time travel short stories. That's just wonderful. And then we have Tweak by Nick Sheff, his drug memoir. Now in a movie edition with a movie cover that has, I don't know if you could spot it, but this has Timothée Chalamet's collarbone on the cover. Such a dreamy collarbone. And then we have Sleepwalk on the Severn by Alice Oswald, a contemporary poet who I know has some intelligent advocates. So that is my Thursday reads. This is a pile of stuff that I will be consuming like candy corn. But that's it for now. I'll be back with plenty more book talk. Don't you worry. Thank you, Book 2.